What's up guys, it is Gnarly, and today I'm going to be doing something a little different. I'm going to be addressing something that's been on my mind ever since Persona 5 came out. As we all know, the Megami Tensei series of games started in 1987 with a little Famicom RPG called Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei, inspired by a novel of the same name. It was pretty revolutionary for its time, taking on a dark story for the JRPG genre, something that the series would later become known for, and being the first game to have a large number of recruitable allies, something that would later influence game franchises like Pokemon. 5 years later, in 1992, Atlus, now publishing games under their own name, released Shin Megami Tensei. The gameplay and story improved on what Megami Tensei and its sequel started. It got popular enough to get its own sequel, and then a sequel/spin-off, Shin Megami Tensei If. From this point on, the series grew even more into other spin-off series such as the Majin Tensei series, the Devil Summoner series, and of course, the Persona series. From when Persona released in 1996, it was met with enough success to warrant a sequel, Persona 2 Innocent Sin in 1999, and then the second part of that sequel, Eternal Punishment in 2000. This would be the last we'd hear from the Persona series until 2006, when new developers were given the task of developing the next game, Persona 3, a game that would change the Megami Tensei series forever. Persona 3 and 4 were a different take on the Megami Tensei series. Rather than focus strictly on combat and dungeon crawling, these games took inspiration from visual novels, and introduced a new mechanic where the player would power up his demons by forming bonds with people in the high school set overworld, something that the series would become famous for and would be copied by several JRPGs in the future. So why am I talking about this? Well, I want to address a question that's plagued the Megami Tensei and Persona fandom for years. That is, has Persona killed Shin Megami Tensei? Now, fan bases of the same franchises being divided are nothing new. When a new entry releases that's different from the previous games, it's bound to cause some kind of divide within the fan base. But it becomes even worse when that said game is actually successful and influences the rest of the series from that point onward, which is exactly what happened with Persona and Shin Megami Tensei. This was a pretty heated topic within the fanbase several years ago, but I haven't really seen a lot of discussion about this recently. But that's actually why I think this topic is more relevant now than it's ever been. There's hardly been any discussion about anything Megami Tensei related that isn't Persona 5. Shin Megami Tensei groups on Facebook are much less active than they were 4 years ago. Shin Megami Tensei YouTube channels are either dead or have completely shifted their focus to Persona. Even my channel has been mostly focused on Persona or Catherine since I rebranded it a few months ago. In this video, to address the question in the title, we're going to compare what we've been getting for Persona to what we've been getting for Shin Megami Tensei since Persona 5 came out. But first, we're going to look at how things were since the beginning of the SMT series almost 30 years ago, before Persona 5 and before Persona 3, because like I said, this topic is much older than Persona 5. Firstly, let's go back to the 90s just to look at how many games we were getting. Shin Megami Tensei came out in 1992, followed by both a sequel and a spin-off, If, in 1994. The first Megami Tensei spin-off series we got was Last Bible, which released less than 2 months after Shin Megami Tensei in Japan. We got not one, but 2 sequels in 1995, and another entry for the Game Gear. The second spin-off series was Majin Tensei, which was released in 1994, its sequel in 1995, and a spin-off/sequel for the Sega Saturn, Rond, in 1997. Now we move on to the Devil Summoner series, which launched on the Sega Saturn in 1995, and its sequel, Soul Hackers, in 1997. I'll get to the Raito series later in the video. Now we finally get to Persona, which released in 1996 for the PlayStation. Persona 2 came 3 years later in 1999, and its sequel in 2000. And let's not forget the standalone spin-offs, Kyu-Yaku Megami Tensei in 1995, Jack Bros in 1995, and Giten Megami Tensei in 1997. So, before Persona 3, we were already getting a ton of Megaten games each year. When I lay them out by year, we had 2 games in 1992, another in 1993, 3 games in 1994, 7 games in 1995, 1 in 1996, 3 in 1997, none in 1998, and 1 in 1999. Now let's move on to the 2000s, which was, in my opinion, the golden age for the series. In 2000, we got Eternal Punishment, the sequel to Persona 2, and the beginning of the Devil Children series with Red and Black Book. The Devil Children series was a more child-friendly take on the Megami Tensei series, more akin to Pokemon, which Atlus was trying to copy at the time. Not exactly everyone's favorite spin-off series, but that didn't stop the series from getting a lot of entries. We got 2 more games in 2001, with White Book and Card Summoner, Light and Dark and Puzzle Decal in 2002, Fire and Ice in 2003, and Messiah Rider in 2004. Now let's go back to Mainline. The first mainline entry of the 2000s wasn't actually Nocturne, it was an Xbox title called Shin Megami Tensei 9 in 2002. The game didn't sell too well for obvious reasons, so Atlus turned to the PS2 and released Nocturne in 2003. After the release of Nocturne, we got a new spin-off series, Digital Devil Saga, which released in 2004, and its sequel 6 months later in 2005. Now we go back to the Devil Summoner series, which got a new entry, this time an action RPG starring a new character named Raido Kuzunoa. The first game released in 2006. Now, before I move on to the rest of the 2000s and early 2010s, let's take a look at how many games we got each year again. In 2000, we got 2 games. 2 in 2001, 2 in 2002, 3 in 2003, 2 in 2004, 1 in 2005, and 1 in 2006, not counting Persona 3. Now we get into the meat of this video, the start of what many fans called Neo Persona. Persona 3 released in 2006 with an updated version following a year later. Then Persona 4 released in 2008. Despite how different Persona 3 and 4 were compared to the rest of the series, this isn't exactly where the divide began. While they were successful for what they were, it's important to keep in mind that they weren't exactly flying off the shelves. At this point, the Megami Tensei series, at least in the West, still wasn't all that well known. Atlus USA was one of those publishers that would localize all the weird Japanese games that nobody else would, and these games were no different. At the time, Atlus was just treating Persona 3 and 4 like every other entry in the series. Now let's take a look at what we got after Persona 3 and 4. The only game we got between the release of Persona 3 and 4 was SMT Imagine, an MMO. In 2008, we got the Raido sequel, but Atlus wasn't done with the 2000s yet. In 2009, we got another mainline entry, Strange Journey, and a revival of the Majin Tensei series, Devil Survivor. Now we get into the 2010s. We didn't get any games in 2010, but in 2011 we got Devil Survivor 2. So between 2007 and 2011, we got a total of 4 games, not counting Persona 3 or 4. 1 in 2007, 2 in 2009, and 1 in 2011. This actually makes 6 games if you count the Persona 1 and 2 re-releases, and 7 if you count Devil Survivor Overclocked. Now we get into 2012, and this is where I believe the separation began, with a Persona 4 spin-off, Persona 4 Arena. This was the first game to drop the Shin Megami Tensei moniker, but I mean, it kinda makes sense. It's a fighting game. Anyway, this game was a port of an arcade game by Arc System Works, the makers of BlazBlue and Guilty Gear, and was pretty successful. Fighting game fans love to keep up with any and all fighting games that are coming out, so a competitive fighting game reasonably brought a lot of fans into the series. Later that year, we got Persona 4 Golden, a re-release of Persona 4 for the PS Vita. It also didn't have the Shin Megami Tensei moniker. You might say it wasn't needed because it was another re-release, but all the other Persona re-releases had it. Sadly, none of the Persona games afterward would include that moniker, not even Persona 5, and this is where the divide really started to widen. With these 2 entries, not to mention an anime adaptation, it seemed like the Persona series, especially 4, was getting milked, which it was, and people were complaining about it. But most of this was actually coming from Persona fans because it had been 4 years since Persona 4 and they were ready for Persona 5. Shin Megami Tensei fans actually weren't complaining that much because we were still getting SMT games. Devil Survivor 2 had just released in North America, and a new mainline entry, Shin Megami Tensei 4, was on its way. Now entering 2013, we get a huge announcement, Shin Megami Tensei Cross Fire Emblem. This had everyone really hyped, and it introduced a lot of Fire Emblem fans to the Shin Megami Tensei series as well. Fast forward a few months, and those of us in the West finally got Soul Hackers for the 3DS. A few months later, Shin Megami Tensei 4 was released and was met with both critical and financial success. 2013 truly was a great year for Shin Megami Tensei fans. Now let's fast forward a few months again. Atlus has a big stream of Persona-related announcements planned, and fans are eager for Persona 5 to be announced. Yeah, you all remember that announcement, right? Winter 2014. Well, this wasn't the only thing that was announced. A total of 3 Persona spin-offs were announced in this stream. Persona 4 Arena Ultimax, Persona Q, and Persona 4 Dancing All Night. Before the announcement, fans were outraged, but they finally calmed down once Persona 5 had been announced, because that's what they wanted the whole time. However, this is where the complaining from SMT fans began. We had a total of 4 Persona games on the way, but not much in the way of SMT. We knew Devil Survivor 2 Record Breaker and SMT Cross Fire Emblem were on the way, but we barely had any info on those games other than they're not dead. In 2014, we didn't get anything that wasn't Persona. In 2015, we finally got Devil Survivor 2 Record Breaker, but that was just another re-release. Oh, but you know what we did get? We finally got a trailer for Shin Megami Tensei Cross Fire Emblem. Needless to say, this pissed off a lot of fans, and the salt levels were higher than they've ever been. 2015 was the year I remember people complaining about the lack of SMT and Persona milking the most. However, we did get an announcement for a new mainline, Shin Megami Tensei 4 Final, which would become Apocalypse in North America, so there was still hope for mainline and SMT fans. In 2016, those of us in North America got Shin Megami Tensei Cross Fire Emblem, now called Tokyo Mirage Sessions, which fans didn't like. Not necessarily because it was a bad game, but because they were upset that this was what the Shin Megami Tensei and Fire Emblem crossover got turned into. However, later that year, we also got Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse, but unfortunately, it wasn't received too well by fans either. The consensus was that it had a lackluster story and stereotypical characters, which of course fans blamed on Persona's influence, but they still accepted it as a mainline entry. So yeah, looking back, this is where the faltering began. Not counting Persona, yes counting re-releases now, we got 1 game in 2012, 1 game in 2013, nothing in 2014, 2 things in 2015, but one of them was Tokyo Mirage Sessions, and 1 in 2016. If you only count Persona, that's 2 in 2012, 1 in 2013, 1 in 2014, 1 in 2015, and 1 in 2016. We got a larger amount of Persona games than we did Shin Megami Tensei games in this period, including re-releases. Still, we were getting something in the way of SMT still. Now we get into the part about Shin Megami Tensei 5 and Persona 5. Persona 5 released in Japan on September 2016 after 2 years of delays and poor communication, but it was met with overwhelming success. 7 months later, we got it in North America, and it was also met with overwhelming success. But what about Shin Megami Tensei 5? Well, as we all know, Shin Megami Tensei 5 was one of the games announced during that big event where Nintendo showed off some stuff for the Switch. That was in January 2017, more than 2 years ago. Since then, we've got confirmation of a Western release, don't know when though, another short teaser, and a few droplets of news that the game is in development. We've also gotten nothing in the way of spin-offs for SMT. No Devil Survivor 3, no Raido 3, no new spin-offs either. Well, what have we gotten for Persona 5? Since then, we've gotten a rhythm game spin-off, 2 if you count the Persona 3 one, a crappy anime adaptation, a dungeon crawler from the makers of Etrian Odyssey, an announcement of what I assume is going to be some kind of re-release, and Joker announced for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Oh, and also hints that there are going to be a crap ton of Persona 5 spin-offs in the future. Just take a moment to take that all in. All these Persona 5 products have been released, announced, or hinted at between the time Shin Megami Tensei 5 was announced and before we've gotten any solid information on it. At the time I'm writing the script for this video, there's also going to be an event at Sega FES where Atlus will probably announce even more Persona 5 stuff. The only actual Megaten game we've gotten in this time was Strange Journey Redux. but that was just a re-release whose purpose was pretty much just to hold us mainline fans over until Shin Megami Tensei 5 comes out. Oh, and not to mention, we didn't get a dub in the Western version. Yeah, the one game in the series made for a Western audience doesn't get an English dub. Real nice, Atlus. Real nice. The last original game we got in the series that wasn't Persona was Shin Megami Tensei 4 Apocalypse, which was released over 3 years ago in Japan. It really pains me to see Atlus treat their most important series this way. Remember that without Megami Tensei, Persona wouldn't exist, and Atlus wouldn't be the successful developers that they are today. You want to know what Atlus did before Megami Tensei? They were making crappy shovelware games for NES, usually movie license games. Yeah, a bunch of those terrible NES games that the Angry Video Game Nerd reviewed were developed by Atlus. Oh, and don't even get me started on how Atlus ignores the first 2 Persona games. Yeah, we have the DLC costumes and the occasional reference here and there, but in the midst of all this Persona hype, we're barely seeing any mentions of Persona 1 or 2. You want to know what the most pathetic thing about it is? In Persona 3 Portable, the female protagonist was long considered to be non-canon, yet she was still able to make it into Persona Q2. Naoya, Tatsuya, Maya, they didn't make it in. Yeah, the female protagonist is now more canon than these guys. I understand that when a series becomes popular, you want to capitalize on it as much as possible, but still, to give the spin-off all the attention and just disregard the series that started it all, it's a big fuck you to both the fans and the creators of those games. And the thing is, I thought it was bad enough how divided the fans were 4 years ago. Now there are Persona 5 fans that don't even know that it's part of the Megami Tensei series, and I think the reason for this is the removal of the Shin Megami Tensei moniker. That moniker being on Persona 3 and 4 was the reason many fans, myself included, found out about the rest of the series. Now, with Persona 5, a good chunk of fans don't even know that Persona 5 came from the Megami Tensei series. It's surprising how many P5 fans I've met that don't know about the series at all. It just seems like now, rather than treating Persona as another Megami Tensei spin-off like they were doing 10 years ago, they've turned it into their main franchise while only keeping mainline alive as an afterthought. They could be bringing them together, but they're not. They're making them grow further and further apart. I don't like to proclaim doom and gloom for the series, but to answer the question in the title of the video, based on the way things are now, I wouldn't say the answer is yes. I'd say more like Persona hasn't killed S&T, but it's just beat the ever-loving crap out of it and put it in the hospital. We haven't gotten any solid SMT 5 updates for over 2 years. We're not getting any other SMT spin-offs as far as we know, and there are dozens of dead Atlus franchises that are just begging for a new entry, all while Persona is getting milked dry. Now, some of the people I follow on Twitter that have connections to insider sources are saying that we'll be getting SMT 5 info soon. And it's not that I don't believe them, but knowing how Atlus has approached this before, I have to wonder what exactly this news is. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Shin Megami Tensei 5 will be shown at Sega FES or some other near-future event, and it'll be coming out later this year. And then they'll announce a bunch of other spin-offs along with it. I hope that's what happens, but knowing Atlus, that's probably not going to. And Shin Megami Tensei 5 isn't the only game we'll probably be waiting an eternity for either. With all the focus on milking Persona 5, we're probably not going to get Persona 6 for an insanely long time either. My prediction is 5 years. I've been called an SMT elitist multiple times, but I'm really not. I love Persona, and I still consider Persona to be a part of the Megami Tensei franchise, but I don't have to be an SMT elitist to be unhappy the way Atlus is treating the series. And that brings me to my last topic. What can Atlus do to lessen the divide and make things better? The first thing is create new SMT spin-off series. Bring back some of the old ones too, like Devil Survivor and Devil Summoner. If that's too much to ask, give us some more re-releases like the original Devil Summoner. It would give those of us in the West a chance to play it. Second, do a better job marketing these games to the Persona audience. Instead of SMT costumes as overpriced DLC, have them be unlockable in-game. Have advertisements for the other games included with the Persona games, like in the cases, on the PS4 dashboard, and in the games themselves. Lastly, and most important, include the Shin Megami Tensei moniker on all future titles in the West. Put the Shin Megami Tensei logo on the covers too. Do this, and I assure you there will be more hype for SMT than ever before. And with that, I'm going to end the video. Anyways, I'm interested in hearing your guys' thoughts. Do you guys think Atlus is ignoring Shin Megami Tensei 5 in favor of Persona? Or do you think the series is still alive and well? Be sure to tell me what you think in the comments, and be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more SMT and Persona videos. Until next time, I will see you guys later.